Thank you, Victoria. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I'm always so honored to be at a microphone because this is a place, this land that we live on here in Saskatchewan, is a place where people have told stories for thousands of years. And so that's my part of being a treaty person, is by telling stories, but more importantly, by listening to stories. So I'm really grateful to be here. I've put a lot of miles on my car in the last few weeks. I have the privilege of telling stories to people of all ages, all over Saskatchewan. I've told stories in more than 100 libraries over the last 20 years. And 2 weeks ago, I think I was in 2 libraries that I'd never been to before, which is a really wild thing for me because that doesn't happen often, that I'm in a library that I haven't seen. And the libraries in Saskatchewan are some of my favorite places. There's a beautiful Carnegie Library in Moose Jaw, which is one of those very stately, beautiful buildings that's stone and pillars. And there's a little library in Central Butte that is in half of a house, and somebody lives on the other side of the bathroom. So if you are in the library and you have to use the washroom, you go into the door, you lock the pocket door on the other side, and you don't use the guy's toothbrush because it is sitting right there. There are libraries in old banks. There are libraries that share town offices and liquor stores. There's one little library, and I think it's in Hazelet, but I'm not 100% sure. And that is a couple of little turnstile kiosks in the corner of the cafe. And so you smell the French fries when you're telling stories and picking out your books. And I've often wondered if I ever get an interlibrary loan and it smells like French fries, I'll know where it came from. So I love story. I love listening to story. I love sharing stories. I've driven so many miles in this province to tell stories that I could have driven to the moon and back. And it's an honor to be able to do that. But today I'm going to read you some poetry. And I'm going to start with one about Saskatchewan. Listen, listen to Saskatchewan skies. Northern lights on a shoreline summer scream, stay, stay. Stars quietly coax me home. Storms crash and crackle, rumbling. Remember me, remember me. Winds whisper, wish, 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 and dream. Silence so seldom. Listen to Saskatchewan skies. Never pushing, screaming, scarring, scaring, tearing me from love, but lifting me to stars still gleaming with gentle moans and tender wind kisses. Stay, remember, wish, wish and dream, and know my heart lives here. Under storm and dust and wind, stars and snow and heat and joy and pain and quiet calm and call of birds, but never silence. Stay, remember, wish, listen. Listen to Saskatchewan skies. You don't have to clap every time. One of the joys of being an artist and of being a storyteller are meeting other people who share their hearts wide open. And last fall we lost one of our greatest storytellers. And every spring there's a contest that goes on that's called the CV2, Contemporary Verse 2, 10-word 48-hour poetry challenge. That's not the exact name, but that's the gist of what happens. And so on Friday night, they send you 10 words, and you're supposed to come up with a poem in 48 hours and email it in. And this year, I didn't get the email because it went to my spam filter, and I didn't get the reminder halfway through. 2 hours before, I get an email that says, the contest is closing in 2 hours, and here are the 10 words. And so I wrote a poem, and the words, some of them might seem a little wonky because there are some weird words, but the words, when I saw them on the page, they reminded me of the farewell of this teller. For the teller, It wasn't witchcraft as she ensorcelled every listener, held on to each child's breath and every adult's eyes as they did cluster at her feet, and she called each one, my darling. Her voice wrapped the audience in sweetness, velour, comfort, warm as fresh bread, and she could weave a tale with need for neither thread nor scissor, so a setting more real than Eden, a talking spider you'd believe. Tales spilled from her mouth, aneath the canyon spilling scenes of wonder, a gorge of memory and awe, of fruit that brought redemption, creatures transformed by the sea, pickerel roasted for the devil's own plate. And when the breath she could no longer hold was hers, and she no longer felt a heartbeat, others kissed her cheeks and called her darling, sat around a plastic toboggan, the ice inside this time, the window open, her nested in her sleeping chamber, so we could sit and tell her shell the stories. No costly gilded satin-lined box, lifted with serpentine chains, held her. She was lowered into the earth by the strong hands of sons she had carried in her womb, her arms, her heart. It wasn't witchcraft as she enchanted every elder, calmed each infant with her voice, a banjo in her lap. She was the magic. So many of you might know our dear Bonnie, who we miss terribly. So I'm going to go into some family poems because one of the things that I explore as a poet, as a storyteller, is not only listening to what is going on right now, but finding the places in my bones and in my blood where I'm connected to, especially the women in my line. But I think I also have a poem about my dad here. And many of them are grandmother poems. But this one is called Mommy, Are You Ready? I am the mother of a little girl, fierce and sassy. She stands taller, outweighs me, but will still run towards me and yell, Are you ready? As she launches into the air, so I will catch her. I am as ready as I can be, just enough time to stretch out my arms and brace my legs so I won't fall. She slows down and eases into arms that can barely still lift her. But my strength has grown with her, and more often she will lie against me when we laugh at Netflix, or hold my hand as we wander shopping malls. I was never ready for her. I wasn't ready when I missed a period, when I wasn't sure there was enough love to grow her. But I took a risk, made it my choice, knowing my son had wished for a sister. I wasn't ready when they wheeled me into an operating room because her heartbeat was too fast. Wasn't ready when they sliced open my belly and pulled her out bloody and pink. And the first thing anyone said was, Look at those eyelashes. I wasn't ready when they set her at my breast the first time. I couldn't feel her because my whole body was drugged to sleep. I wasn't ready to put her on her first school bus, to let her out of my sight, out of arm's reach, out of where I could protect her. I wasn't ready when she needed help with the new math, and both of us were in tears because it didn't even make sense to the teachers who were just learning it. I wasn't ready to explain to her how she would have to pay attention, to keep safe, to explain what Me Too meant, and that I wanted a refund and we wouldn't be going to a concert with her favorite band, the band who we'd seen at the X, the one whose songs we belted out at the top of our lungs in the living room, the one whose songs were the first that spoke to me when I had healed enough to be able to listen to pop music again. I'm not ready for her to kiss her first boyfriend or take her first flight without me or plans to move out. But it doesn't matter. I have to trust her. She is fierce and sassy, and she will be ready. This one's called A Matter of Taste. I would lick my elbow for the taste of honey and butter melted off a slice of my grandmother's fresh bread. I would swallow every spoonful of her soup, salty and thick, even if it was stretched with leftover porridge from the morning. My mouth would water for her date cake, sweetened only with a little store-bought orange juice and a little brown sugar. I would sit at her table and drink up the stories that fell out of mouths she was feeding. I could stomach it all, but the spring vegetable my mother loved. I could not chew the asparagus, couldn't feel it on my tongue or bear the squeak of it against my teeth. I set it aside in fancy restaurants and walked past it growing wild in the city. I could not eat asparagus until I sat at the table where the stories fell, until I listened to my grandmother tell of life as a young bride on a military base far from home when she was pregnant with her first son, my uncle, until I heard her speak of morning sickness and a spring when every young wife brought the fresh green spears to the table after boiling them on their stoves until the air was filled with their stink, and she had to run for the bucket. I could not chew asparagus until I knew the story of the place in my marrow where my grandmother's blood and tales flowed. Some of my grandmother poems bring the same images back, so I'm going to read a couple of more grandmother poems, but I'm going to read a poem about my dad. Cleaning out my father's pockets. One day, I was sitting at the kitchen table with Dad, Mom, siblings, and children, opening a package from my youngest brother, who had sent us chopsticks and salty snacks from Japan. Dad brought sake, and we toasted the one who was missing. The next to next day, I answered the door. The earth dropped. My knees gave out. 2 siblings, 3 words. Our dad died. We buried him in my mom's hometown. There was no warning, no plan, no last request to be scattered to the wind instead of being planted in cold, hard ground. I only heard him say shit one time in my whole life. I watched him eat a single handful of potato chips a couple of times a week. I can't stop until I've consumed the whole bag. I saw him sip slowly, just 1 beer on special occasions. I had never seen him light a cigarette, though I carry a memory of the smell of his pipe and cigars when we camped in my first years. I swore he didn't fill his lungs with nicotine. I could remember him lighting a campfire with 1 match. He only ever used 1 match. I punched a classmate who told me she had seen him walking and smoking on the way to school. My dad's daughter was tougher than anyone else's daughter, and smoking was slander. If everyone in our small city had seen him walk or walked beside him. I crumbled, when my mother sorted through his suit coat pockets and pulled out a pack of Benson and Hedges Kings and a stack of the funeral card services for men he'd known, men he didn't want to follow to a middle-aged man's row in the cemetery. Okay, I gotta find a happier poem. Wonder. My first crush was on Diana. My little brother teased I had to wear glasses because I sat too close to the TV. I had to see her. Wished she would pull me from our river town, hold my hand, and show me the big city. She wore glasses too, had long hair pulled back like my favorite teachers, the Mrs., Miss, Ms., and sisters at the chalkboard, fierce and buttoned up. The misters threw chalk and shoes and insults, and by grade 4, one was running his hand across our shoulders, down our backs, seeking the straps that would bind our budding. Boys in the room pulled our hair, planted worms on our sandwiches, splashed us with their bikes. That's how boys show they like you. But we had Diana, only 3 channels, 1 fuzzy, 1 French, and we waited for Friday night, for prime time, begged our parents to let us stay home to watch. I had Diana, and she would have been enough in her suit and bun, but when she spun around and around and around, she was everything, could beat anyone, stopped bullets, pulled truth. I wished. I spun around and around and around, but I was still small, standing up to injustice of mud splashes and worm sandwiches. I spin around and around and around, dizzy, trying to keep up with deadlines and family and fitness. It leaves me breathless, fighting, standing tall. But even without cleavage and red boots, I still wear my glasses, pull my hair back, and even if no one else believes, there is still wonder in this woman. Victoria, how's my time? Do you want to keep going? I can do another one? Okay. Crash. Someday I will plant tomatoes in the semi-tire that hit me, that moved my pelvis out of joint, that pulled my ribs, that twisted my spine, that bruised my wrist, that didn't break a single bone, that didn't break me, that tore apart my fender, that reduced the glass headlight casing back to grains of sand. Someday I will plant tomatoes in the semi-tire that hit me, that flashed in front of my car, that bounced down, that felt more like a wall than the moose did. The tire that bounced twice again, and over barbed wire, and into a field before resting with shards of my fiberglass still in the rim. Someday I will plant tomatoes in the semi-tire that hit me, that didn't stop the semi, that probably wasn't noticed for 100 miles. That tire that reached speeds faster than the truck, and I don't even know which direction it was coming from. The tire that could have killed me if it had bounced a few inches closer to the driver's side, or a second earlier or later than its impact. Someday I will plant tomatoes in that semi-tire that hit me, that changed every need in my body, that gave me waking ache reminders every single day that I am alive, that made me run, that pushed me out of comfort and into the pain, that is changing me, that is forcing me to see a path different from the one I chose, that gave me strength to walk taller, to run at all. Someday I will plant tomatoes in the semi-tire that hit me, but 200 plus pounds of metal and rubber hadn't hurt like the words of those who had called themselves boyfriends and husbands. Heavy shame pelted me for breasts too small and hair too long, scars and stretch marks and wrinkles, even my monthly bleeding. None of this was enough to warrant bumping me off the road. I was expected to keep on traveling because there was no hand raised to me, no marks left, no evidence of grit to plant seeds in. Some of us need to be hit in our very body. Someday I will plant tomatoes in the semi-tire that hit me, that almost crushed my spirit, and I will celebrate by crushing the fruit into pasta sauce, crushing them between my teeth, and the tire will be my beautiful garden. I think I'll do one more and then we'll let somebody else's voice ring out. So So one of the things that the Slam team is doing is we're working on a few poems that we'll perform together. And Victoria, we came up with an idea a few weeks ago of our hands. And I think about that often because I think about being a mother and I think about my grandmothers. And once again, we go back into the grandmother and mother piece here. But Victoria gave us a line that's left over center, right over center. And we were thinking about hands and braiding and how we are connected. And so we hope to, when we compete in Guelph, have some poems that we present as a strong team that works really well together. And I'm so grateful to be part of this team and to work with these amazing people and there's something that's that's really amazing to work with people of all ages, and we have a broad range on the team. And I'm way older than everybody else, so there's something that's really wonderful about the energy on the team. Left over center, right over center, my hands are now mother's hands, sometimes blistered from ripping out weeds, sometimes warmed by the twirling of tinier hands than mine. My hands seem smaller now that my baby's hands are bigger than mine. Now I am grateful for the days my daughter begs me to braid her hair and cool the fever at her temples. Left over center, right over center. Most days I pick up the story, but yesterday, sitting with the widows of her sons and her 2 living daughters, grandchildren and greats, at 95, my grandmother has begun to forget the names of the little ones, who she used to take into the bush, tie an ice cream bucket around their waist with old pantyhose to pick saskatoons and choke cherries, little mouths purpled. She has kept the threads, a fridge full of smiling school photos, and I wonder who will pull the threads together when she is gone. Left over center, right over center. Thank you. I'm always the shortest person, but Victoria is only slightly taller than me, so I only have to move the mic a little bit. I don't have to actually play with the stand, which is always one of those things that you have to do. So I've got a few more grandmother poems, and then I have a few strange imagination things, because as a storyteller and as a writer, my process goes with different parts of my brain on different days, and some of my poetry is so deeply rooted, and some of my stories are so deeply rooted in memory, and things that are so clear to me with the way they taste and the way they sound and the way that I can touch them and the way they smell. And then some things are so highly grasped from imagination. So I feel like a tree sometimes, and one of my favorite things to carry with me to keep me grounded is an acorn. And I always have a pocket full of acorns because they not only remind me that they are something that I can hold and that I feel connected to, but they remind me of promise and possibilities and hopes, and that something really small can grow into something really big. And so it's my connection to the roots, but also the branches, so the memory and the imagination. And so we'll start with memory, and then we'll go into imagination and back to memory again. Birth order. Second oldest granddaughter, making cabbage rolls on Good Friday, but I'm not allowed to taste the meat or know if the salt is right. Mixed up pork for the fat, beef and moose from the freezer, clipped the thick leaf veins, soured to $9 a head. Grandma had a crock in the corner of the kitchen, and it scented the autumn and the winter. I didn't learn to make them by watching or helping, but tasted them, covered in tomatoes in the pan. My cabbage rolls aren't as pretty as my mother's, but there are second helpings for some, though I worried there wouldn't be enough. And that's something else so that I got from my mother and my grandmother. Oh, it's not good enough. Oh, there won't be enough. So, we carry these things in our bones and in our hearts. This is another one about the same grandmother again. It's called the Blue Bowl. Dandelion bright scrambles in the sky blue bowl set in the center of an oak table for me. How, Grandma, how did you get those eggs so bright? A wink and a whisper to the little city girl. Butter, real butter. I browned the butter first. I mixed up the eggs and they scrambled. I could never get my eggs that golden. I tried with real butter, browned it, burned it. I missed the chickens running, free to pick weeds, the smell of Grandma's bread drifting into the raspberry patch, honey dripping to my elbow, too far for my tongue to reach, sausage, salty and fat, soup rich and thick, filled with all that will make you grow big and strong, until she'd made 1,000 meals too many. Put away the pots and the spoons, knives and salt, treasures marked with masking tape and black felt pens. My uncle claims the silver and the crystal. My sister takes the painting from the wall. Mine is melamine, the blue bowl. And so that grandmother, and I have sometimes the same images, the images of the bread, the smell of the bread, and the feel of that honey dripping down my arm. It comes into a couple of poems, but that's an image of this time of year for me, that time of year when the raspberries were ripening and going berry picking with my grandmother. And for years, even after she quit picking the berries herself, she still baked bread every Tuesday morning and filled the freezer with bread. And when I would go visit her as an adult and stop in, and she'd have soup in the freezer, and she'd pull out a couple of margarine containers, and they often weren't the same, but she'd put them into the pot, and it was based on how many people were there for lunch that day. And so it could be chicken noodle mixed with vegetable, mixed with borscht, and it was always delicious. And when I left, she always gave me a jar or two of raspberry jam or Saskatoon berry jam or choke cherry syrup. So I think about that at this time of year. And I see that there are some choke cherries on the roads here that are almost ready for picking. Black and white. Memory in my pelvic bone of not being able to spread and birth a child like other women, except the one with the cinched waist wedding photo, corset so tight, no hint of a smile. Memory caught in the breastbone of no one to remember but one pose, married at 21, had a child, lived only 10 days as a mother, left behind 2 boys. The one whose ring she wore went south. The other was raised by her sister. Memory in my shoulder bone of carrying a heavy son, ripped from my too small frame. But there are 100 photos of us smiling, following a time when tools and pills and IV drips and sutures and sutures and sutures and an air ambulance and a dozen doctors and nurses kept both of us breathing. Memory in my bones, her century-old DNA in my blood. My body remembers Mary. So then I'm going to go across the province, and there's another, I think this might be the last grandmother poem, and this is my other grandparents. So that I talk, and I think I had more connections with my farm grandparents, and they moved into a small town. But I also was the closest grandchild to my town grandparents who lived in North Battleford. And this is a poem called In the Stucco House. I don't remember the sound of his cough. I can see his shoulders break and start, long, thin, tobacco-stained fingers pulling through the silver, brill-creamed hair, still long on top. I don't think he wanted anyone to know he shared a bed with another, even though they had 3 boys and 3 girls. He never went to her room. I never heard him snore. I don't know what he heard. I don't remember the sound of his cough. And I didn't hear what he heard in the headphones he put on when he turned out all the lights, except one, small and targeted to the cards or a paperback, solitaire, a million moves, shuffle, tick, fuzzy AM signals as he turned the dial, a hair's width, words or music. I don't remember him playing the piano, but it was there beside the record collection, a basement museum to orchestras and jazz and smoke, old books and stamps. I could still feel the vinyl square placemat at my fingertips. I see the Fab Four smiling photo tray hanging on cupboard wall between the kitchen and the dining room he sat in. The bathroom was hers too. Rose lotion in the pink bottle on the metal shelf above the toilet. Canned meat and Velveeta browning on white buns in the toaster oven. When she left alone and they sold everything without telling her, her cheek was like paper. I thought I'd inhale her when I kissed her if I breathed in at the wrong time. And when she left alone, she was carried to the room with only enough space for the expos and her stories on the TV, and a couple of those pillows that will never wear out. Okay, so now we're going to go into imagination. So one of the places that I have an opportunity to write sometimes is out at St. Peter's Abbey. And it's a lovely place. It's a monastery, and there are still monks who live there, and there's a college. And the guest master is a little monk, and he's a fantastic storyteller with a twinkle in his eye. And his history is as an undertaker, and so he has all these really wonderful stories, and you kind of get this creepy vibe sometimes from him, just thinking about where he's been. But he likes to take you on a tour of the monastery, and one of my favorite rooms is in the deep basement, and so this is a little bit of a poem that was inspired by that. It's called Cold Room. Cobwebs grow on shelves where mustard pickles fade only slightly year on year. A single yellow bulb burns to fade them only moments at a time. No one lingers in this space where sound can rise bigger than the rats that sometimes swim and perish in pails of antifreeze while curious about what else they will smell in the dirt dugout cellar. The kitchen staff sniffle and make excuses to send each other down for wrinkled, sprouting, reaching potatoes in February. An angry ancient furnace spits gusts of hot breathing. Cobwebs grow on shelves where beet pickles, still purple enough to conceal what jars sit behind them, are covered in a decade or more of dust. Dust thick enough to plant potato eyes in the dark. All the better to see you with down here. Okay, so I bring weird creatures into Saskatchewan sometimes, so the next few are pretty strange. Land legs. She married the merman, although he would have fancied a husband. She loved the gurgle of his breathing when he removed his land helmet. He watched every tight-butted, bearded creature as they passed. She had a house, and although his people didn't record such things as birthdays or save baby teeth for possible later DNA matches, she was able to secure him a green card and a work visa. He was shocked when she told him how everyone worked. Theirs was a traditional signing of the register at City Hall in the presence of her one agreeable sister and one sweaty hall monitor. They failed the blood test, but there was no proof of close cousinship, so they were allowed to approach the table. They followed with cucumber and peanut butter sandwiches on white bread without crusts on the riverbank, where he'd first emerged. He'd been weak and stinging from the sludge and sewage, but she found him. His tail was badly damaged, The emergency room doctor told him he'd never swim again. The only solution was to perform surgery. They couldn't find a donor sturgeon, but amid fear of rejection, they decided on a full lower body transplant. The legs were strong, the organ between them thick and disease-free. He was stitched up, enjoyed 5 months of fame as a medical journal article subject, and reluctant consultant in the search for others of his kind, through a dragging of rivers and a quick sifting of the Pacific garbage patch. Okay, so I'm going on to another weird one. This one's called regret. I caught a fish so big I had to slit its belly, pull out its guts, and wear it home as a hat. My hands were full carrying rod and tackle, and it wouldn't fit into the bucket. It started to rain, but the scales were waterproof. The storm kicked up fierce, so I stretched the skin over my shoulders and back, climbed all the way inside, stayed there for 8 hours, lit a tiny fire on the ground and cooked a bit of the tail. Wouldn't have to worry about the bones. I washed and washed and washed, but couldn't get the scent out of my hair. I tried a tin of ketchup, heard the farmers say, bathe your dog in tomato paste if he's sprayed by a skunk. Leave him outside for a few days. Well, maybe the ketchup had too much sugar. If I stood by a deep fryer for a few minutes, I'd smell like a Friday night church supper. I tried perfume, a bottle my mother kept under the bathroom sink, a bottle my grandmother had kept for special occasions like funerals and chili cook-offs. I used too much, left a wake behind of watering eyes and wilting violets. I spent hours in the tub, changing the water every 10 minutes, until my first layer of skin scraped away, and the rest was wrinkled, raisin tight. I pulled a jar of emergency prune juice from the fridge, dumped it over my head, booked an appointment to have my head shaved. But at the salon door, the receptionist shook her head and pushed me back outside. I knelt down and prayed for more rain to escape my new name, Fishhead Girl. Okay, I got one more weird one. Just because, it's afternoon. People are kind of having naps, and that's kind of nice. Stories, I don't mind if people nap while I'm telling stories or reading poetry. This one's called Sink. When Anne-Marie fished the knots of hair out of the reeking drain with a twisted crochet hook, she looked closely at the strands. The once grays and pinks, browns, and blondes were a mess of dark green. Soap residue bubbled, but there were other faint shapes, almost as translucent as water. She thought they looked like living creatures, freshwater shrimp curled into shining pearls. When she leaned even closer, she could see 3 tiny, perfectly formed alligators. She peeled them away and set them on a teaspoon. Plenty of room to move if they were living. She imagined that being out of the moisture, they would shrink in minutes. But dry air had the opposite effect on the creatures than on those add-water foam blue, red, and yellow dinosaurs. As the beasts dried, they expanded, breathing and hungry. At the size of a fist, they tore into the clump of hair, pulled and fought, leapt at fruit flies hovering over the sink. Anne-Marie locked the bathroom door, held the bobby pin key in her left hand, ran to the encyclopedia to find out what they needed. She could hear thrashing against the wall, snarling, cracking of doorframe wood. The beasts, now as big as Dobermans, found her in the kitchen reaching for the front door. While they licked up the blood when they were finished, slid into a curbside puddle, the wet of the storm drain in front of the house. And they began to shrink as soon as they moistened. Waited. Okay, I'm going to end with something a little more normal. That's a little bit of what goes on in my head. Memory, imagination. Memory is grounded, imagination's ridiculous. Seaside pebbles. I've always filled my pockets with treasures, would have worked for shiny round stones. I didn't know why I weighed myself down with something so simple, picked up on beaches and shorelines of oceans, lakes and rivers. In my winterland, they don't shimmer like they do at the sea. They are part of the water, but I fill the cracks in my suitcase and carry them home with the intention of giving them away. But like the acorns, I only give them to those who are very special. Today I walked the beach, ran the beach, walked it, looked up at the vultures as a brown pelican died, saw snowy plovers worry when I got too close, wondered about the white great blue heron, and wanted to know the root of my obsession. When we were young, my father would stop at a candy store in Banff and buy a little bag of candy rocks, almost lifelike, shore-like, stone-like, seaside pebbles. He let us have one or two, and the rest he would stash in his top drawer until he was dead and buried under stone, and my mother cleaned out his dresser, and there were all these little bags of what had once been sugar soft enough to bite, and now rock hard. I've skipped the sweet and sticky and fill my dressers and dishes and pockets and sometimes even my shoes with sparkling hard, rubbed round by the water, bits of memory of the ages, bones of sea creatures long forgotten by everyone but the water. And I have one more tiny little one. And it's water themed as well. And this came from a Witness and Wonder inspiration night at Danica's Poetry a couple months ago. With my eyes closed, the rock is cold under me. This is the place that holds me, where I am baptized by the scent of poplar and pine, where geese and mallards sing choir of winged angels, and gentle current the waves lap, a chorus against my rock, my sneakers, my rawness. I wonder why these banks have power over me. I call the river mother, watch her colors change as my own crowning glory fades. But she doesn't age. I wonder if it hurts her, binds her wrist with each new bridge. Does she cry when sirens break the silence? I pick up a pocket full of pebbles to weigh me down, keep me grounded. Feel them between my fingers, round or sharp, stream-loved. Licking my lips, it isn't sea salt, but my own sweat, savory. And when I open my eyes again, I'm surrounded by the blue and not cold anymore. Thank you for having us out here this afternoon.